Yes, in
How are we
the
doing, everybody?
How are we today? Welcome back
We
to
are
the
doing
80s.
fantastic, and welcome to the most amazing podcast on the planet. 80s mayhem, music, metal, horror movies, and more. And I'm here with my spectacularly awesome host, Chudster. How you doing, my friend?
Vladdy-Vlad, I am awesome today.
And that's right, I'm Vladdy-Vlad. This is Chudster and Vladdy-Vlad. So I noticed you're wearing a very interesting t-shirt, Joe.
Yeah.
What does that say? Fangoria?
Fangoria, bro.
I don't practice Fangoria. I don't have a crystal ball. Is that from that Sublime song?
Well, I love Sublime. It would have been nice if they would have done a song on Fangoria, but no. This was actually the first issue, okay?
25 Years of Godzilla?
Yeah, that was the first issue. Apparently, there was little or no interest in another magazine that did not deviate much from the already established Starlog Cinefantastique structure, but because of great reader interest in a lavishly illustrated article on Tom Savini's gruesome makeup effects for the 1978 film Dawn of the Dead, the magazine began focusing on readers' macabre interest in gory images of monsters and carnage.
Photo preview Alien.
Yeah.
A movie that came out 46 years ago, and this is like, hey, we've got the inside scoop on this new movie called Alien. Ooh, what's that? Let's check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and believe it or not, it's actually just a small spread. It's like a 3-page article.
Well, I didn't know that Starlog made Fangoria because it looks very Starlog-ish.
It was originally going to be called Fantastica, and I actually have an ad from one of my Starlogs right here. This is what it was going to be called originally. Interestingly enough, and it basically says it best when I'm going to reference it here. Basically, a magazine that was called Fantastic Films. They filed a lawsuit against them before they released it. And that, along with the fact that they wanted it to be a kind of a companion magazine or a sister magazine to Starlog that dealt with dark fantasy, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, The Lord of the Rings, Conan the Barbarian, which Robert E. Howard's comic book, which they announced they were going to make a film, which wasn't until 4 years later. And the funny thing was that they decided to call it Fantastica based on that. Now, the mantra of Fangoria is essentially monsters, aliens, and bizarre creatures, right? So if you think about it, science fiction, fantasy, and horror have those things. It's just the genre changes them. You look at them differently within each genre, okay? They have a different presence, I think, cinematically. So the first issue did terrible. It was really just Tom Savini's article that had opened up a doorway towards the horror genre, which they didn't really expect. Because it came out quarterly back then, and it's ironic because now it's coming out quarterly. This is the 4th issue, right? And it's like Spock is on the front cover of Fangoria.
Well, that's the first Star Trek, and then Salem's Lot.
Yep.
Ooh, I love Marilyn Monroe.
And this is when they decided that they have to go horror because that's what's going to draw people's attention. The Shining, right? That was the cover story, and they covered it. And that's when it was affirmed that it would be that, but there was a big drawback because a lot of people were offended by it. But at the same time, I mean, on a personal story, you remember what happened. 3 instances that I experienced. There were 2 teachers that didn't like Fangoria, like in high school, and they represented the overall conservative kind of outlook on why it's bad, because anything that kids enjoy is bad, And I remember in history class, I had a Fango mag in my trapper folder, and I think it was Mr. O'Connell, our history teacher, actually literally took it out and started reading it in front of the class and saying, oh, look at this garbage. This is what you into? This is what you're into? I'm going to complain, basically, about this. And he made a big thing about it. And a funny thing was, I think, I can't remember what happened. I think I might have gotten detention or something like that. It was really no big thing. I didn't really care.
For Fangoria Magazine?
I think so. I mean,
my take on it is that, growing up as a teenager in the 80s, to me, Fangoria was the Playboy magazine of horror. So what Playboy magazine is to sex, Fangoria is to horror. So I would remember we'd go to lunch and you'd be like pulling out the magazine, like
Yeah, it was.
showing it to people, and like, the fuck is that, man? And instead of like,
Yeah.
some Playboy centerfold, it was a guy in a wheelchair from Friday the 13th Part 2 with a hatchet in his face. That was the centerfold.
Yeah, I know.
So yeah, it was one of these things in high school, and I think you said it was Father John.
Yeah, Father John Voglio, who actually picked it up because I think another kid was reading an issue that I lent him, and he picked it up and said, "This is filth. Okay, gentlemen, this is garbage. I don't want you."
But just like Playboy, it would have been like Playboy. It would have been the same thing.
Yeah.
For horror, and it reminds me also of we talked about this a long time ago, is Creepshow the movie. When the comic book came out, it was pretty graphic, and as you remember. And don't post this picture, by the way, because it's disgusting. The last picture, the last page is like E.G. Marshall, a cockroach is coming out of his face. And I remember you could buy that at like the local CVS.
Yeah.
To me, that was like horror porn. So like Fangoria is horror porn, just like the Creepshow comic book was horror porn, like Stephen King playing Jody Verrill and having all this green shit, like, attaching itself to his face. Like he basically turned into the Swamp Thing, right?
Well, ironically enough,
Stephen King's birthday yesterday, September 21st.
That's right.
78 years old.
That's right. God bless him.
Yes. But it's still like disgusting. I mean, I haven't seen that movie in like a long time, but
it's like, you know what it's like?
It was disgusting enough,
But you know what it was like? It was like today when I look at it, because I saw it when I was 10 years old. And that was my first Fango mag.
You know what's funny, Chudster? If someone said I was 10 years old in 1982, they're probably thinking like, I saw E.T., I saw Blade Runner, I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark last year. You're like, at 10 years old, I saw Creepshow.
Which, that's funny because they would have liked to, probably would have rather have seen Creepshow, maybe because it's that forbidden fruit. And, the funny thing is about the roaches, here's a funny story about the roaches. I saw Tom Savini at a Q&A on YouTube, and he said that one of the entomologists, there were two entomologists, and based on my sources were from the American Museum of Natural History, who were hired to collect the bugs from Trinidad. And they had to go to a bat cave to be able to collect them. But he said that he would talk to them and the stories they told you, because for one thing, they had to mine like 2 stories down through bat guano. Okay, it's bat, but it becomes like a rock, and you have to mine down. And when they broke the surface, all they had were rubber bands around their sleeves and around their pants. And when they broke the surface, the roaches would come up and they would start bagging them and taking them up. And the funny thing was that they said that, there were bats flying. These are micro bats, not like mega bats, like fruit bats. Micro bats use echolocation, but because it's their cave, so they know it, so they don't use the echolocation. So when you're doing something and you're swarmed with these things, one can either fly in your face, in your mouth. It's like, oh, God, you can only imagine that. And then, they said that, they would lay a bunch of the roaches out. And if you laid on them, they would literally carry you like your body was moving on the floor.
Your body surfing in a Nine Inch Nails concert.
Yeah, only they're roaches, man. Yeah, like Joe's apartment. Yeah, Joe. That was one thing. You brought up an interesting, one of the things that you said that I thought is really true is that it was like horror porn. And there's one issue.
It is still horror porn. Much more so than it would be now, because I was at Barnes & Noble a couple of months ago in the magazine rack. And a magazine rack isn't something you really look at anymore.
Right.
Because everything's like digital. And it's like, they had Fangoria, but it was more like, I think Sinners. The movie Sinners was the focus. It was what's on the cover. Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler, the director. So it was more mainstream, I felt. Like, it wasn't like you turn a page like, it was more like the way you'd compare like Playboy in the 80s and 90s to like Stuff Magazine, FHM, and a couple of the others I can't think of right now, where you'd see like not nudity, but like suggested nudity, like almost nudity.
Mm-hmm.
And with Fangoria, it was just like, just something grotesque. And now it's more about like the content, like the articles, how it's more of an art form.
Well, here's the
Like,
thing. Now, and it's funny. I mean, I'm going to cross-reference an event that I did at the Museum of Modern Art. It was like before the pandemic, and I was one of the security guards that was part of the audio guides. And long story short, I think it was the director of the education department, who now is working at the new museum downtown. And she interviewed me based on what I talked about, which was an image of Frankenstein's monster from Boris Karloff. It was a test shot. And one of the things she asked me about in terms of my interest is, like, apparently because of my interest, it's an art form, right? Horror is an art, just like
yeah,
like the horror genre itself with writing, music. It's an art form, right? It's a
yeah.
form of drama. Now, essentially, it was true, and I actually talked about like that image of Frankenstein's monster. But back then, during our time, I'm going to bring something up.
Hotel Hell.
Yeah, this was at one point the most collectible of all issues. It went up to like maybe hundreds of dollars. In their catalog, it was like $50, the back issues. Now, here's a funny thing about it.
Why was that issue worth so much money as opposed to the other issues?
It was because they had a surplus of them. It was the worst selling issue because at the time it was panned. Stores, supermarkets, a lot of places that sold magazines and bookstores did not want to actually carry that because they thought that cover was offensive. A guy in a pig mask.
Like a guy in a pig mask with a, yeah.
It was Rory Calhoun, believe it or not. And the funny thing was, like some issues would basically have a paperback cover on it because it was thought they wouldn't carry it unless they did that, even if they paid for vendors to sell it, or at least even if they paid for.
Did it say Fangoria on it or something? Like
Yeah,
stenciled on the paper bag?
yeah. Or sometimes when I would subscribe and it was
Or
newsprint.
exactly go, okay, yeah, I'll buy that.
Yeah, like when it was newsprint and I would subscribe, a lot of the issues would have that sleeve, but for that particular issue, they would actually have it on when it was on the counter. And now, because there was a surplus, they would have giveaways in their catalog between that and the 10th issue, which was scanners, and the front cover was the head exploding scene. And that was a lot of money.
That's what I'm talking about, horror porn.
Yeah, that was a
Full
lot of
nudity,
money.
somebody's head blowing off,
But the reason why they were worth so much money in the catalog and collectible was because they produced a surplus that they couldn't get rid of. And even when they had giveaways and they would offer extra issues, the ones that they were still left with was the 9th issue. To the point where as years passed, there weren't any more around, they didn't print them anymore, and it was the most collectible issue. I mean, it's basic economics about supply and demand, just like comic books. Sometimes it's when they're not in demand and people remember it and they want it and they search for it, and then there's no more of it. There's more of a demand, and then you increase the value. But I'm also going to go into something else that you talked about with it being an art. I also think that it's a skill. One of the things about Fangoria that comes out is like when they talk about artists, makeup artists, they tend to cater towards the makeup artist more or less, like Rob Bottin, Rick Baker.
Well, you could win an Oscar for makeup effects.
Yeah, 1982. It was actually a special achievement award, though. It wasn't like best makeup effects for a horror film that year. I think it was a special.
No, I'm just saying makeup effects in general.
Yeah, but the thing about makeup effects at that time was that horror wasn't actually as acceptable and it wasn't as mainstreamed as it's becoming now. That's the thing. So back then, with him, I'm sorry, I probably didn't read what you were saying. The turning point is what's interesting, and I think that my 100 issues, the back issues, which I have a box of, the first 100 issues, if you were going to go to film school and you were interested in exploitation, horror, in that genre, and you wanted to learn about the business, and you read those 100 issues back to back, you probably would learn a whole lot more that they wouldn't teach you in film school. Because it's really about going out there. Articles with Tom Savini and how he would say that, I started out, I would go places and give cards out and I would actually show them my stuff. And he would always actually say in his makeup school, which is really a kind of like, a good lesson, for students. He would meet some of his students at, certain events, and they'd be producers. He'd be like, wow, this is your lucky day. They're like, he would say this, they're producers here and everything. Do you have your portfolio? And they wouldn't have it with him. He'd be pissed. Like, what are you doing? Like, and it's about, you really got to be a self-starter. And I think it depends on two different things: your skill and your passion. Those are the things that I get with all the articles I've read with people like Stan Winston, all different kinds of directors, from John Carpenter to George Romero and his origin stories. Stephen King, constantly a fixture, with a lot of...
We will be doing a podcast on Stephen King. We have to.
That's going to be several parts.
Yeah, we get different genres, like Stephen King in the 70s, Stephen King in the 80s, Stephen King in the 90s, Stephen King at the movies.
Right. James Cameron, forget about it. FANGORIA Magazine? I mean, from soup to nuts, from the Terminator to Aliens. Oh my God, forget about it. There were so many articles. Insightful articles, very vivid articles. But the other thing about the genre is how it bled into different things like the music industry. And I'm going to pull a couple of things up that you might find interesting, John. Here's one. Torture, the Jacksons.
Great song from the Victory album.
Now that's Ed French. He's a makeup artist. I actually have one of the last masks that he made for a not a B movie, but a C grade movie called Geek Maggot Bingo.
And here's Chud FX.
Yeah.
The Cannibals.
That he actually did the makeup effects to the victims. And I think it was John Gosciano, who did the makeup effects to Zelig, the Woody Allen film, who also did the Chud monsters.
So I'm assuming this is the video of the Jacksons' torture.
Yeah, and Ed French had done the makeup effects. That Geek Maggot Bingo mask makes an appearance in the beginning, with the eye here, the other eye here, the nose. Speaking of Chud, this issue, on the top over here on the top left, Chud. This is what Ed French had done. This guy, I know this guy. His first name, Rocco, on the top. And he was one of the victims. Here I am with him when I was working at Hudson Yards. I was at security. This is him now. And I met him, and he told me that what they did was he actually, for a test shot, for that makeup, he was on a platform, and he was underneath with like the other half of him, and he had to stay like that overnight once Ed French had applied the makeup. And then they started shooting and doing all these different kinds of things. And this is what he autographed. To my pal, Rocco. And he autographed it here. Okay, this guy. This is Edwin Neal. This is the
with the cowboy hat.
Yeah.
Who's the other guy in the picture?
Oh, that's me, I think, isn't it? I think it is.
Yeah, I think it's you.
Yeah, wearing my Evil Dead Ash shirt. And he actually signed my Fango mag. And the signature is right up here on the top right. Oh. And that was a pleasure. That was a panel, because we actually saw a restored print at the Museum of Modern Art. And I even had the panels here. Here they are. This was all of them after the film. The cinematographer, the female lead, and she was the one that basically was the one that was put on the meat hook. And they were talking about the background of the movie and everything like that. And that was so interesting. When I showed him that magazine, and, I even asked him about Poltergeist. And it was so funny. I mean, he literally said, like, basically, yeah. I mean, Tobe Hooper really didn't direct most of it. I think Steven Spielberg came in to kind of, like, finish a lot of loose ends in that movie. Here you go, John. Ozzy.
Yes.
Dearly departed, I mean, especially for this. And this is actually getting back to my point, because I first went into the autographs. Now we see, like, we also have Psychotherapy, the Ramones, and it's the makeup effects. And this is another thing about Fangoria that was very, very trendy as it bled into different genres, like the entertainment industry. With the Jacksons, you had Thriller. Rick Baker had done that because Michael Jackson had seen An American Werewolf of London. He was a big fan. He called up John Landis, and he wanted Rick Baker to do the makeup effects for him as the Catman and all the zombie makeup and everything like that. And Torture and all that, and Ozzy Osbourne.
I didn't even know they did a video for Torture. That's the Victory album. It's the same album It came out after Thriller. It's the same album with the song State of Shock with Mick Jagger singing alongside with Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson, that's right. That's right.
And Torture's a great song too.
That's funny. The video was produced in Queens, and it was choreographed by Paula Abdul, I believe.
Oh, cool.
I never really even knew.
I have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
One, how many issues to this date do they have of Fangoria? How many Fangoria issues are out there?
There were close to like 390 on newsprint up until the very last one before they had the website.
So 390 in, say, 40 years.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my first question. The second question is, I don't think you have all of them, but do you have most of them, or how many are you missing, or which ones are you missing in your collection, Chud?
I would actually say that like the first 100 I have, up until 100, and then every now and then
you didn't skip any from 1 to 100. You've got the first 100.
Yeah, I think from like 89 up until like 90, I think there are a few that are missing.
Okay, but that's really cool. You've got the first 100
in a box. And here's the thing about the back issues from the first.
But you have those little plastic things you put them in, you know.
Yeah, sometimes depending on they should be fine depending on where you keep them. That's the thing. Like the Fantico store was a very, very big exclusive part of their catalog for the merchandise. From many different companies, many different vendors, many different small local publications that you wouldn't see anywhere else, as well as a listing of their whole full catalog. And all of those issues from that first volume were all destroyed in a warehouse fire. So the only back issues that exist are in private collections, believe it or not. But here's the ironic thing. They're worth maybe like Fango number 9 I was telling you about. At one time it was worth a lot of money. Now you maybe for like $40 on eBay. You may get one that's, because it depends. They've been reprinted.
Depends on the quality, the condition of it.
They would actually have it for their catalog. And that's how I got most of the back issues I didn't have. Either when I was in school, Mom would buy it for me, or she would pick it up for me, or even later on, I would just pick it up myself. But the newer issues, the second volume, is a totally different story, and it just shows you how strong the fan base is. It's a lot like Karate Kid to Cobra Kai. It's like everybody remembered it, and when it came back, they were like, yeah, this is great that Fangoria came back. With the second volume of issues, they're so thick. My God. I mean, they're like 100 pages, and they're glossy. It's like a coffee table book. And they made them much more collectible. So if you find like the newer issues, there are about 25 or 26 new issues so far, because they did them quarterly. Because the website was very instrumental in basically keeping Fangoria in the public image. It was around the teens, 2010 to 2017, that the magazine suffered. That's when the last of the few issues were published, and they just stopped, and they kept the website going up until they had gotten Cinestate to acquire them. And that was very interesting, because then Fangoria came back on the presses. And everybody was like, well, everybody basically goes online. And that's really what the magazine was competing with. But the fact that they were coming back and the way they promoted it, and because of what they did, I love the content. The problem is, it's like, because of it's 100 pages, there are very few ads. So there's a lot of content to read. But they still have the Monster Invasion with the coming attractions. They have the Postal Zone, the Nightmare Library, which has like the previews of authors of books. And they even have conventions. They have the Chainsaw Awards. It's evolved so much, and there's so much that the magazine has done. But there was a problem. There was a controversy. And I'll probably read it out here just to be clear and correct. On June 2020, the Daily Beast published an expose about producer Adam Donaghy's sexual misconduct on the set of a Cinestate film. In August of 2020, Fangoria was acquired by Wonderwall Entertainment CEO Tara Ansley and entrepreneur Abby Gold, and quarterly printing continued under their ownership. The new owners initially planned to launch a multimedia studio and produce and distribute fiction and nonfiction content. As of May of 2025, Wonderwall has not released any multimedia content since then. I'm not going to go into that. But essentially, Fangoria had come out when the Daily Beast had published this, before the Daily Beast had published this, and they announced that they're going to break from Cinestate because of that. They did it promptly. And this was after maybe the first 2 or 3 issues, I believe. And I was like, wow, this is like, the fact that they did that, they saved the magazine because they showed a certain sense of virtue, and they basically showed themselves to be upright. And this is another reason why I really am such a proud reader of the magazine. The website also features several specialized horror blogs, including articles that continued Fangoria's long tradition of being supportive of the LGBTQ people working in the horror industry, which to me, I think, shows a certain sense of integrity, which bleeds into many current things that are going on now that I'm not even going to get into. But it was very, very good that they did that. I met Mike Ingold. I actually have, as a matter of fact, autographed issues. This is actually the second volume of issues. It's autographed. They autographed it for me. Tony Timpone was there. The new issue actually commemorates a lot of the old traditions of the magazine, and you have Tony Timpone's elegies, and he actually remembers certain aspects of the magazine.
Right.
There's certain things that were always known. Here's another one that they autographed. This is the second one. This is Joe Bob Riggs. He was kind of like one of the last of the horror hosts that came out.
He was in Casino.
That's right.
Yes.
He was. Here you go, Godzilla vs. Kong. I love this issue. So yeah, here you go, Us. There you go. And this one's autographed as well. And I really think it's very full. It's very complete. It's very topical. And even people like Barbara Crampton, her memories with Stuart Gordon on the set of Reanimator or From Beyond. It's so interesting when you actually see them now, and when they go to conventions, there's such a big turnout. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was a column that was called The Pit and the Pen. It was actually from Alex Gordon. He wrote the column, and he offered behind-the-scenes stories from his long career as a producer of B-movies. Okay, he was a veteran producer and film historian, and known for his work with American International Pictures (AIP). The Vincent Price films, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Raven, Comedy of Terrors, all the greats, and he also produced films like The Day the World Ended, She Creatures, those monster movies, and he had a long professional and personal association with Gene Autry, believe it or not, who my mother idolized. She was a big Gene Autry fan. It actually focused on his experience in making low-budget horror sci-fi films. Okay, the stories are very conversational and very nostalgic. That's what I liked about it. And they were delightfully personal in a sense that they actually looked at the classic old days of horror movies. And here's an example of something like, let's say, The Pit and the Pendulum when they were filming it, or Memories with Vincent Price, the shooting of The Raven, which I was at a Q&A with Roger Corman, and I got to go because somebody that worked in programming couldn't make it. He knew I was a horror fanatic, and he said, listen, I got to go because, Sony is one of the sponsors of the event. We got to represent, but I can't. Could you go for me? I was like, who is it?
Wow.
It's Roger Corman. I was like, of course I'm going to go. I'm interested. Yeah. So I actually he gave me the pass, and I actually got to ask him a personal question, which we may have actually talked about before. And I said to him, listen, you gave an interview with Fangoria Magazine. You were remembering your days on the set with AIP, and you were filming The Raven, and you were talking about Vincent Price and Boris Karloff and Peter Lorre, and you were talking about the chemistry that they had, but it wasn't really that way at first.
Yeah.
Can you talk about exactly how that was able to work, how it worked itself out? And he looked at me and he said, Boris Karloff told me one morning after shooting a couple of scenes that I always have my lines memorized. He told me, I always do. And it just infuriates me and just frustrates me when other actors don't do that. And it actually halts the production and it throws your timing off. It really is very courteous, and I really would be appreciated. And I always appreciate it if other actors would take the time to really learn basically their lines rather than trying to ad-lib, because Peter Lorre would always ad-lib. He was that kind of an actor. He would actually go off script. and would throw Karloff's timing off. Because funny enough, during The Shining, like when Jack Nicholson's marking off his script and he's looking and he said, I saw Boris Karloff do this because Jack Nicholson was on The Raven. He's very young. He's like in his early 20s. And he plays Peter Lorre's son. And they have this kind of comedy like routine, you know. And the funny thing was that Vincent Price, he said, was quite brilliant and he understood both styles of acting. And he said, listen, he intervened and Price had said, listen, what I'm going to do is I'll give visual cues for the both of you in a way that Boris is going to know when Peter is going to basically ad lib. Peter is going to know the same thing when Boris is going to say a line. And he managed to do that while shooting a scene, which made it much more cohesive. And he said after that, they were all pals. And I was like, wow, that really shows you that, first of all, it's not easy to do this shit. You got to really know your lines and you got to really do this. And you got to deal with different temperaments when you're shooting a movie. And, you know, he raved about Vincent Price. I mean, everybody loved him on the set. He said that, you know, he was very accommodating. He was quite cultivated too, culturally. You know, his father invented baking soda. You know, and there were so many things about him. That's a whole nother that's another show. We had to do a show on Vincent Price. We have to, even in the '80s with Thriller. I mean, that's something that we got to talk about. But you know, essentially, that was one experience, you know, about the pit and the pen that I actually referred to because it's from that time period. But Alex Gordon, pretty much as a film historian, he's provided readers with a very unique and valuable perspective on the film industry. And he was someone who was pretty much, the reason why is because he was involved in its creation. Okay. I mean, his insights, along with his long history in film preservation, which is very important, and his personal stories, I think made The Pit and the Pen a beloved and memorable feature for many Fangoria readers, like especially in the 1980s, like myself. I always used to look for The Pit and the Pen because it would always go to nostalgic movies. You know, because it would always bring that back. Because you really, at that time, you wouldn't have had the 80s if it wasn't for, like, let's say the 1960s, the 1950s. It all pretty much evolved to that when it came to filmmaking and it came to all the different trends. I mean, one of the great things about fiction, whether it's horror or even science fiction, like with Star Trek, you know, if it's political, if you mask the story with fictional characters, then you can do it. And it tends to mirror what we're going through. And I think with the horror genre, I think that with Fangoria, I think it brought to light a certain thing that we're like, oh, God, oh, it's disgusting and whatever. But, I mean, you got to realize that it's fake. It's not real. But I will say this. One of the most interesting articles that I've read, an article from Tom Savini, who was talking about his experience in Vietnam. And one of the things that he actually made a distinction about, which I read, I think it was in an issue covering Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and I think it was an in-depth conversation with him. I think it was that issue. And he said that many people think that I learned makeup effects based on Vietnam, like I was interested in doing it. And I think the distinction is that his technique was enhanced, I think, based on what he actually physically saw, because he was a combat photographer. But his interest in monster makeup went back to the 1940s and 50s with Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Godzilla, all those different things. Those are the things that made him want to make the monsters. And I think my personal connection is how I think his mother actually introduced him to famous monsters of Filmland. And the funny thing about that is he said, look, you know, basically his mother said to him, look, you know, this is how they make the monsters. And he has all the famous Monsters of Filmland issues, like all the earlier ones. He has the same ones that I think Father Gene showed me, Father Gene Walter. He was really into Fangoria. He was the one teacher that contrasted all the other faculty members and how they felt about it. And, you know, he was a fan who really made it. That's what Bob Martin had said. And one of the things he actually disclosed, he said, was that was my interest as a combat photographer. You know, that's what enhanced my technique. And I think that was never more proven more thoroughly through films like Friday the 13th, the final chapter, The Prowler, it's a slasher film, and Day of the Dead. That's like his best work. this anatomically correct gore that was just unbelievable. Even Bob Martin appeared as a zombie. It was a cover story for Fango number 43. And another interesting thing is that the covers, which I'm going to go into a little bit about, which is another thing, because that's what sells the magazine, right? We talked about the controversy. The cover is very, very instrumental based on what we were talking about. It could be very controversial. It could actually hinder or maybe harm the reputation of the magazine based on what I said before. We talked about Fango number 9. Or it can enhance it. Now, here's an interesting artist by the name of Basil Gogos. And he used to illustrate the early covers of famous monsters of filmland. His portraits were of like Dracula, Frankenstein. The sales of the magazine, oddly enough, were high when he used to illustrate the covers for famous monsters of filmland. When they started purchasing the right to use photos from the films for the cover stories that they would feature, the sales would go down, which I thought was pretty interesting. And there are two artists. Here's one. Now, this is Frank Frazetta. He's the artist that illustrated this cover. If you look, like, basically, you know, it really brings out a lot of highlights, there's so many influences, basically, you know, artistically. Here's the 25th issue. This was an issue that Father Gene actually had seen in my Trapper folder, and he asked me...
I love this. David Cronenberg on Videodrome. TV with guts. Literally with guts.
But that
and that's an old-ass TV.
Yeah, with veins and everything.
You could do that on flat screen 4K QLED, could you? No.
Well, only Rick Baker could do that. He did the makeup effects. Maybe he could tell you that. Yeah. But the funny thing is that if you look at the top, exclusive, right? The editorial, famous monsters wouldn't... Yeah. David Ackerman. And he was the publisher and the creator of Famous Monsters of Filmland. Now, the funny thing was that issue was the one that Father Gene had seen in my Trapper folder. He took it up. All right, meet me at 2:15. And I was like, oh, man, I'm in trouble. I'm probably going to have to stuff envelopes or whatever. At the end of the day, I come to his office. I literally see him, like, relax. And he just finished reading it. He's like, it's okay. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, I'm not... No, I wanted to give it back to you, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it, you know, but I thought it was interesting because something caught my eye about it. But it's okay. Then he said, this is what I used to collect. And he had like a handful of like famous monsters of filmland from freaking late 1950s and early 1960s. I was like, wow. I was like, yeah, that's what I used to collect. And he said the reason why this caught my interest is because of what he saw on the top, the Ackerman, the editorial, because it was the 25th anniversary of the magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland.
Ackerman, the Legend of Ron Burgundy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I believe so. I think so. And the funny thing was that the magazine was kind of waning because of competition from Fangoria, but a lot of the writers and creators of Fangoria read Famous Monsters of Filmland, just like Toby Hooper would read Famous Monsters of Filmland, Tom Savini, Rick Baker, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas. They all collected Famous Monsters of Filmland. And they printed the editorial that was supposed to be Ackerman's last because they had kept him on as an advisor, but he was actually ruled out by the board of directors, and they were going to basically liquidate the magazine. And his was very, very... That's exactly what his editorial basically showed. That's what he was talking about. And he was trying to think about new original ideas to keep the magazine going. And he was always basically overridden by the other board of directors because they really just wanted to cash out. That's what they wanted to do. It surfaced later as Monster Land. And there were a few publications I have of that. But it wasn't really the same. It wasn't really the same. It was more like a fanzine. But they used the Monster logo, but they gave it a different name. But Forey Ackerman backed it. But Fangoria, as an homage, which is really... That shows you how much of a great publication they are. You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, how much integrity they have as a magazine. Rather than... It wasn't like, yeah, we're the best. We even beat famous monsters of film land. They were around forever. Even they couldn't beat us. No, their thing was, this was the magazine that influenced us. We're going to print the editorial that they wouldn't print, which really said a lot. And they really spoke up for Forey Ackerman, who, like, his mansion was like filled with film props from over like hundreds and hundreds of films. He wrote books. He wrote screenplays. He wrote scripts. He's seen everything. Metropolis. He had the freaking robot that they made from Metropolis, Fritz Lang's Metropolis. He had the flying saucers from War of the Worlds from 1954. He had all these different things from Forbidden Planet. Anything you can think about, any prop from any film, any horror movie, anything, he collected it. When you went to his mansion, it was like going to a museum. And, he lived to the ripe old age of his late 90s, I think, when he passed away. The guest book itself is probably worth like maybe millions of dollars because of the signatures of all the filmmakers and actors and famous people and influential people who went there to, see it. The guest book alone, I can only imagine, is probably worth a lot of money because people used to go and actually see his magic. You can go right through it. Vampirella, all these different things that he basically wrote, all these different things that he did. And it's funny, I have an Accutron Space View watch. It was my father's. I still have it. It's like, an exposed mechanism, and it was a tuning fork mechanism. It was before the quartz. And there's a picture of Forey Ackerman with an Accutron, like this. I was saying to myself, wow, I have an Accutron too. It was my father's, but I was like, wow, that's just it actually doesn't really have that much to do with anything, but I couldn't help but notice it. But that was the 25th issue that printed his editorial. And, that was the good thing about Fangoria, was that it never forgot. It never forgot its creators. There was integrity, and first and foremost, it's really about the filmmaking process. When you read that magazine, you can't put it down because you read about directing, you read about film scripts, you read about producers, you read about the business aspect of it in a way that when you go to film school, you're probably not going to know. I mean, people like William Friedkin, the dearly departed, basically said, if you want to learn about making films, watch Alfred Hitchcock. Don't go to film school. I think he said something like that.
We talked about a future podcast about best audio commentaries. Mm-hmm. And William Friedkin does the audio commentary for Vertigo, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think it's loaded soup to nuts with the business, the nuts and bolts of the business.
With a lot of meat on the bone.
Meat on the bone.
Another Chudster saying.
And you've worked on films too. I mean, you've worked in the second unit. You understand these things. And every time we talk, that the one thing that comes out is money. And not in the sense that that's what it's all about, but you got to kind of know how to basically generate it. You have to create a currency for it. My memories of Fangoria is such that I'm renewing my subscription. I love the direction the magazine is going. The only difference between then and now is that there's more. I mean, it's that simple. There's way more. It's a lot more. It's like, thank God it's quarterly, because it takes a while to read it. Because, I mean, I read the last issue in like maybe a couple of days, but I was relaxed and I was like in a place where I could probably read it. Yeah. But it's so thorough, and it's just so it's so broad. I mean, they're really, really very broad strokes in terms of like what you tend to see.
Right. So when I looked at I guess it's the current issue of Fangoria on the newsstand of Barnes & Noble, it reminded me of Playboy in that way, where it's like there's all the nudity and the sex, but there are a lot of great articles and interviews. And the way Fangoria, and I didn't like look through every page of it, but it seems to me, and I mean this as a compliment, like Fangoria Magazine now is like less gore and more like content. Like making of films, making of horror films, making of suspense films.
Extremely thorough. Thorough. And also very revealing in terms of it, because even back then, you're right. There were things I never really would have known about film editing. And like with George Romero, there were a lot of articles with him for Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead, and he would talk about certain things about how he got his start, and it was the most simple films that were so easy to make, but because of that, you learned how to make films because you got involved. With Night of the Living Dead, with the bonus features, with the editing process, I mean, you literally handled and cut the film and looked and put it together. And I think I wonder what that's like when you make a film and you do it that way, and then you look at dailies, or some filmmakers are like, I don't like to look at dailies, or actors are like, I don't care. Some of them, they it's like it's an essential thing. It's an essential process. But you learn why.
Yeah.
And films are very, very technical because they require all the arts. And I think that Fangoria is just one of those lenses that provides a look into that. And this is within the horror genre. They would always have articles about book publications you can't find anymore, about, monster films, horror films, if they're still in print. If they're not in print, where to find them.
I love looking at that with the martial arts magazines. I don't even know if they make them anymore, because we just talked about like the state of magazines in this day and age. But like, in the 80s, I was a big collector of, Black Belt magazine. There was another martial arts magazine, I can't remember the name of it. And it was almost like the way Rolling Stone magazine would always have like Jimi Hendrix on the cover, or like Jim Morrison or Led Zeppelin.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always like, for Black Belt magazine, it was always Bruce Lee on the cover, Chuck Norris, or even Steven Seagal back then, who was kind of the new martial artist back then. So of course, you talk about, Playboy magazine for sex. You talk about Fangoria for horror. You talk about, say, Black Belt magazine for martial arts. And these are three popular magazines in the 80s. Of course, another one would be Guitar for the Practicing Musician. That kind of took over Guitar World, I think, in the 80s. And then Guitar World kind of made a resurgence, which is still around. Guitar for the Practicing Musician has been gone since like the last 25 years or so.
Sure. It's funny that you say that. That's true. I mean, today, and Fangoria basically suffered from like 2010 to 2017.
I think a lot of magazines did.
Because of access to online sources. You go online, you can actually see the articles. And
yeah, like for example, for Guitar Magazine, and even Drums for You, you'd have to buy the magazine to find sheet music, right?
Yeah.
Now you could find PDFs of virtually anything. Anybody, you and I could like come up with our own notation, transcription of a song, or we could find videos, even like isolated tracks. Eddie Van Halen doing isolated tracks for Jump or whatever, Randy Rhoads.
Yeah.
So it's like, you don't need a magazine anymore. You don't need to buy a magazine anymore for things like that. You could find it online. And I'm sure with Fangoria, it's kind of similar, like how to make your own, mask. How to make your own
latex.
fake blood,
How to write your own script.
Yeah.
When you're shooting.
I mean, I'm surprised. Maybe, Tom Savini has one of these like master classes. Like, I'll teach you how to be.
He's got a makeup school.
Yeah.
He's got a huge makeup school, in fact, and it's a degreed program. He did a video for me during the pandemic, Cameo, and I paid $100 for him to do a video where I wanted to see drawings because I knew he did canvases too, but I've seen him. But he was like, I don't have any drawings, but I have Universal Monsters. He went through his whole house downstairs, all his makeup effects, fluffy. He had a big, huge, a cast replica of the Phantom of the Opera, Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster. In his backyard, it almost reminded me of like a Greek diner when he went outside and you had like the hedges and you had the creature from the Black Lagoon. It almost reminded me of like a Neptune statue, It's so funny. But he had the creature from the Black Lagoon. He has all these different things. But he would also point to some of the work that his students had done. He said, here, and there's like basically a sculpture of Dracula, how he looked in his bat form from Bram Stoker's Dracula. He's like, such and such, never sculpted before. He made that. And, one of the things he would do, even back then when I would read in Fangoria, was like if he had like a lot of people that would, young kids that would work with latex and whatnot, they would send him pictures. And if they were good enough, he would actually start a portfolio on them and even reference them. In Friday the 13th, the final chapter, remember all the masks, the prosthetic masks that the character of Tommy had? those were made by a makeup artist that never got a screen credit. He tried to get a screen credit for him for that movie. I don't think he was really able ever to do it, but that's the thing. That's what I love about the whole genre, is this whole mass creation of people that will work in the trade, with Rick Baker, when they did American Werewolf of London, he said that, and I read this, I think it was in Fangoria, he said, we were a bunch of kids that really didn't even know what we were doing, but he also knew that what would look right on film and what wouldn't. And when they would strain and work on like the whole change-o hands, change-o feet, which is all like, pneumatic tubing and whatnot. The famous is like the front bust and how his head comes out into the wolf form, which actually they have someplace. And they showed it without the latex over it. It's very robotic and mechanical because it's animatronic. And he built this thing, and then when they shot it, John Landis was like that. It was like just basically a couple of seconds. That's it, and cut. He's like, and Rick Baker's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, we got it. But then when they actually saw the first opening of it and people's reaction to it, he was like, oh, so that's why we did that. That's why there's one thing that you also learn is the relationship between the director and the makeup artist, the producer and the director and the script writer. All these different things come into play. And that's why it really is food for thought. So it doesn't surprise me that Tom Savini's program is a degreed program. And I've seen the work that a lot of his students produce. It's amazing. He actually called it the Frankenstein syndrome. And he would always say this, and still does. It's the Frankenstein syndrome, is that, you build something, and then when you see what it looks like or how it comes out, you can't believe it. It's like the Frankenstein syndrome, because you're creating this. But the idea is, for me, whenever I'm drawing and I'm doing my posters and whatnot for my monster series, when I finish it, it's different than when I am doing it. I tend to find that as laborious as it is for me to actually go through the process, by the time I finish it, I think back, and it's like this kind of chapter. Each one is like a chapter in that phase, because I started the first one like 5 years ago, and now I got 10 posters. I can only imagine in the film industry with a filmmaker, with all the films they make. My God, it's like, I can only imagine what that must feel like. It's like another personality. That's the great thing about the film industry, especially horror. That's that place that's out there where you can really be creative. And it's never been taken seriously. It's just starting to be taken seriously. And the recent publications show that.
I slightly disagree with you, because I think that, at least from the 80s or 70s, I'm talking about horror movies, of course.
Yeah.
You have these sort of, well, not mainstream horror movies, but like horror movies that have transcended their genre. So like Halloween, which at the time, maybe before the Blair Witch Project, was like the highest grossing independent low budget film of all time. It was like a $240,000 budget, and it made like, I don't know, $50 million. Even Friday the 13th made a lot of money. But you take horror suspense films like Seven and Silence of the Lambs, even Aliens, where it's like they've transcended their genre. So, a film like Silence of the Lambs winning Best Picture, Best Screenplay.
And then they would, that's the
I guess
thing.
it is and it isn't. I mean, I guess a movie like Silence of the Lambs, is it a horror film? Yes. Is it a horror film? No. It's more like a suspense film. Seven, I don't think you'd call it a horror film, but it's scary and very disturbing.
Rob Bottin did the makeup effects, but they wouldn't want to call it that, though. They wouldn't want to call it that, though, because if it's a contender for the Oscars or whatnot, if it's a horror movie. I
think once a film like that, once like a horror suspense film is nominated for an Academy Award, aside from like music score and makeup and sound effects, like that aside, like the bigger Oscars, like actor, actress, screenplay, movie, I think that's when it transcends its genre. So a movie like Silence of the Lambs, it may be a horror film, but it's way more than just that. It's considered one of the best films of all time.
Well, I think that today...
that's 1991.
Yeah. Whereas today, I think that it basically, a film like Sinners, like a vampire film that made like $100 million. You
that
know,
movie made a shit ton of money. That movie made at least $350 million with, I think, $100 million budget. Let's tack on another $10 or $20 million for marketing. I mean, video sales, rental, HBO Max. I mean, digital. I mean, that movie's going to continue to make money. Don't you look it up? Yeah.
I'm adding up the numbers. But that's the thing. I mean, that's what I love about you. It's when you come up with the numbers, because that's really what generates it. But I think it's also
I'm like that, like when people are at sports.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, everyone has like dream teams, like, oh, we'll put this person on there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, you know, I'm not really into sports. I'm not into sports. But it's kind of like when your favorite team wins the Super Bowl and my favorite movie makes $1 billion. It's kind of the same thing. When I'm looking at stats, oh, on Wikipedia, what did Mission Impossible make this weekend? Oh, what did F1 make this weekend? What did Superman make this weekend? Oh my God, yeah, it's great, you know.
Well, it's a major, it's a major barometer though to really tell how the film is doing, to tell how you're doing, you know. So
not that it matters. What do I care whether Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 2 or whatever it's called, Final Reckoning, makes $598 million or $600 million? What do I care? It's still out there. It still exists. But it's kind of like, yeah, my movie made $600 million, whatever.
Well, going back to it, I mean, don't forget that between Halloween and Friday the 13th, then you had every independent filmmaker just coming out and just churning out these
Well,
films.
same with Star Wars. It was kind of like every studio, low budget and high budget, were like, what's our Star Wars? That's really why the Star Trek films came out, really.
Star Crash. It was.
I think I saw it at digital somewhere.
Carolyn Monroe. Definitely.
I love Carolyn Monroe. Every time you bring her up, I'm like, I love Carolyn Monroe.
Of course, man. Of course. Maniac with Joe Spinell.
She should have had a bigger part in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Oh, yeah.
Grossly underused.
Oh.
She's only like, literally like 3 scenes in the movie.
Yeah, true. But I mean, Fango 4 covered her because she did a lot. Like there was an April Fool's slasher film. They covered her, I think, in Fango number 43. I mean,
she's in Dracula 80, 1972.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a landmark year, by the way, of course. Wink, wink.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. That's our
And one of the voyages of Sinbad or something like that. You know, like you said.
The Seven Voyages of Sinbad with John Philip Law, Ray Harryhausen. You know, the whole animation thing. But that's a whole nother thing. But closing thoughts. I got to say that, you know, my journey, where I am now with my my monster series, where I'm working now, and you know what I see, and you know what's projected through the events with the films they show, and the friends that some of the friends that I have there, along with you, and how long I've known you. Fangoria for me is that barometer that is still there, because despite, you know, 2010 to 2007, they still stayed. They kept the website up, and they maintained their popularity. And when they bought the magazine back, even with the final, that minor backlash with Cinestate, and then they got two acquisitions to save the magazine, I'm glad that it's still in print and that I'm renewing my subscription, because I think that the horror genre, for me, I don't want it to become too mainstreamed, like it's in the discount pack. What I liked about that time in high school, growing up, is that it had a certain individual quality. It was a place I could go to. Not so much because it was my own selfish interest, but it was a place where I can forget about the negativity and see how people can be creative and try to acquire skills myself based on the makeup effects, based on writing, based on directing, based on the business aspect of it, in a way I never thought I'd ever learn. And Fangoria kind of opened that up to me. Even when it came to comic book writing and comic book artists, people like Rob Bottin, you know, they were inspired by, they were into cartoons. That's what influenced their makeup effects. Mike Plug, who was an illustrator, or Bernie Wrightston, you talked about Creepshow. He also did Batman the Cult, which was creepy as fuck. Excuse my language. But all these different writers and illustrators.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about all the things that Fangoria opened up for me.
It was a joke, bad joke.
Oh, I want to make sure I stay on track. That's the thing. But I'm sure we're both on it. But you know what I'm talking about. You know?
I was there.
Yeah, you know what
I
I'm
was there
saying?
with you.
The reactions, and it's just so true. And it kind of made me the kind of person that I am in terms of perception, in terms of what is art, and how I can channel my artistic expression through drawing and all these other different things, through metal, and how they all are together, And I only wish Fangoria another 50, 60 years, which I'm sure they'll still be around. So this pretty much ends our chapter on Fangoria, but it's not going to be our last.
We'll be talking more about Fangoria. And, when the next issue comes out, you said it's quarterly, right?
Yeah.
We'll do another podcast on that issue.
Kind of a quick blip about that. Yeah, sure.
Next time it comes out, we'll do a review, unboxing, shall we say, of the issue.
Well, you talked about Stephen King. I'm going to probably, based on what we do.
And you're right, Chudster. Like, we can't just do one podcast on Stephen King. We could break it down: 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, movies.
Well, I got several articles in Fangoria that he did, interviews he gave, that you might find interesting.
You know what his political views are.
Oh, yeah. That's another reason why I love him. There's so much content from Fangoria that can contribute to that. I mean, they could just be footnoted as part of our bibliography, I guess. Kind of like a book report. But definitely so. So if there's anything that we missed or anything that you could probably add,
please let us know. Yeah, say it in
the comments section. And we hope that you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. It was definitely a trip down memory lane.
I love your enthusiasm for it, Chudster.
Thank you, Vlad.
Love your enthusiasm.
Well, it comes from you, Vladdy-Vlad, and your enthusiasm with everything that you do.
Thank you, Chud.
And I'm really looking forward to our next topic, which is Spinal Tap.
Yes.
The 4K.
I mean, Spinal Tap, the band. Spinal Tap, the behemoth, whatever you call that. Not just the movie, but just Spinal Tap, the whole band.
Yeah, it goes up to 11.
Well, it went up to 11. Now it goes to infinity.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Imagine that amp.
Spinal Tap to, that Nigel Tufnell said this Spinal Tap amp went to 11, and Marshall made an amp that goes to infinity. There we go.
They sure did.
Yes.
Thank you for watching. Peace out. And if anything, remember, the 80s are still with us. They've never left us.
Always will be with us.
That's what the immortal John Carpenter had said.